Hello and welcome to another episode of FireDEV. And this week I have Parker One with me. Thank you, Parker, for joining us on the podcast today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
No
Glad to be here.
problem. So you worked at 343. What did you do there? And obviously, anyone that's not aware of 343 Industries, tell them what 343 is about.
Yeah, so 343 Industries makes Halo as part of Microsoft, and I was the AI gameplay engineer there. Um, I like the best way to describe it was I was kind of writing the systems that drove the. I guess I'll kind of say it in a way that anybody can understand. I was basically working on all the systems that drove the AI characters, all the bad guys that you're shooting at when you're playing the game. Um, and we're talking animation node graphs. I was writing a lot of those systems. Um, there's a system called informally and internally called action system, which is a layer that sits between the behavior tree and the animation system. So I was kind of the owner of that system. And also, I wrote the encounter behavior, or I didn't write the encounter behavior tree. I wrote a lot of the editor functionality and some of the core functionality that went into the encounter behavior tree, which is the secondary layer of behavior tree functionality that kind of sits above the individual behavior tree that runs the individual AI. And this was important because Halo has a lot of kind of coordinated, large-scale, epic battles, and it needed that extra level of coordination on top of the standard behavior tree that AI uses in video games. So yeah, kind of like the full stack AI character behaviors and just the underlying systems that ran those characters.
Okay. And which Halo games did you work on? Halo Infinite? Did you work on any previous ones?
No, so I joined about a.
Okay, so we just had a bit of technical difficulty there. If there's anything wrong in the final episode, but so yeah, we were just talking about 343. Your work there. You worked on Halo Infinite, and with Halo Infinite, how much of the old sort of code and developer base, was brought over or not? Because obviously, Halo Infinite, the first game on their next generation of consoles, so, like, was it made from the ground or what was brought over?
Oh, jeez. Oh, there was a lot of legacy. There was a lot of work being done to rewrite a lot of these things, but you could absolutely go into the code base and find things that are, literally. I think some of them were older than I am. Really. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of legacy code in there that we were kind of dealing with, and there was like a big push to kind of take the code base to modernize it, and you know, I I don't know what the exact plan was because that was many layers above my pay grade. But yeah, there was a lot of effort to kind of modernize the whole thing, but we did have to deal with a lot of really old stuff that you know it's too dangerous to go in and touch any of that stuff unless that's like your full-time job and that's kind of all you're going to be doing because there's some really foundational stuff that the entire games are built on, that the Halo games are built on. So yeah, it was a interesting challenge, I think, and we talked about it quite a bit too, just because it was impacting our lives quite a bit. Um, yeah. I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, like, what sort of foundational stuff are we talking? Because you said the code's again older than you. Again, I don't know whether if you're exaggerating or if you're being honest. Because if it's older than you, I would assume you're talking going as far back as Halo 2 and Halo 1 code, and that's original Xbox. So, like, what would realistically be there that's still there today and that's foundational?
It's more like when you say foundational, say like some of the structures, I guess, like the way the data is laid out,
Okay.
it's just more like it's old way. Like it's not like functionally there's much of a difference, like when you're writing C++ code, like structs and C or classes, there's no real functional difference between them. The only difference between structs and classes are permissions of data access permission between the two. Like by default, like even then you can also specify exactly what you want and have it behave exactly the same. So there was no real like functionally um, kind of difficult things about it. It's just more like that they were laid out. The code was written like C, and I was born in '96, and some of this code was like definitely authored and labeled at the very top to be written before that. So
Yeah. Okay.
yeah,
So
it's
you're
kind of like a
talking
funny thing.
more like programming paradigms, or like you're saying, how to store data and those sort of
Yeah,
standards or way of doing things just are industry standard now. Essentially, that's basically what you're saying.
exactly. Yeah, like and like C++ has especially if you're kind of interested in writing kind of templates and like meta programming type of stuff, it's really hard to work with that kind of code because it relies heavily on pattern matching and kind of almost like quasi code generation type of logic that you have to write into your code. And it's kind of hard to like kind of integrate that stuff into that old stuff. So I just kind of gave up and ended up writing almost like C-like code whenever I'm like interfacing with that kind of stuff. So
Okay.
it's just more like that like I just couldn't write it to the quality that or not quality more like that kind of like modern paradigm that I was kind of shooting for when I'm writing code. Um, so yeah, it was just it was just more of like a funny story more so than like it really functionally kind of impacted my work. Because like once you understand all the different nuances between C and C++, you kind of understand like how to make it work together at least at a functional level. So you
Yeah.
can write everything. There's nothing gonna stop you from doing something just because it was written in like a C style. The annoying part is that it just doesn't scale as well. If you want to write some really clean code that's gonna package up all the functionality nicely so that you can't mess it up. That's just the hard part. But obviously you're in a team with dozens of programs all working on the same little bit of code. You're bound to get some issues. So I would have always really loved to package up really nicely with modern C++ features, but I just didn't have the time, to
Yeah.
like
Fair
parse through
enough.
all that old code. Yeah, yeah.
So I'm guessing Halo Infinite and the new Halos are coded in C++. plus plus. Were the older ones in C, or were they still C++ plus plus as well?
No, so I mean, it's more written in C style. It's not that it was actually C.
Okay.
It doesn't right like you write code in like C. It's like but run it through a C++ compiler. It's still C++ code, right?
Yeah.
And we're running everything through a C++ compiler. So it's all C++. It's just that we just took stuff that's written like C and then just
Ah.
kept building on top of it, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah. So
do you
it's
think it was written in a C-like fashion originally because maybe the develop again? You'll know better than I will because you've been a free for free, and obviously that's the didn't make the original Halo. Bungie did, but there's people from there, and the legacies there. Like, do you think it was partly because they may not have believed C++ would be as prevalent as it has become in the gaming industry and the industry as a whole, and possibly they were just more used to C? Like, what was the reason for doing a C style, even though you're using C++ technically?
I can't really figure out what the intention behind the code is, right? Like I'm never gonna talk. I mean, I never talk to these guys. I don't know if I ever get to, which would be kind of cool to be honest. But um, I'll never know. Like I mean, I even like I would like walking around GDC. You'll sometimes find engineers that'll like are real gung ho about how C is the way to go because or C style really because it's kind of funny that they'll say that because they're still using C++ compilers, but like they're kind of adamant about that C style of coding because it's more closer to what the actual machine is doing. I think that's the argument that I heard, which I
Yeah,
kind
I've
of
heard that
agree.
before as well.
Yeah, but so I'll never I'll never know, what the intention there was. But I wouldn't be surprised if at that point in time, it was still very common for people to be writing C because, industry, you still meet people that tell you stories about writing stuff and fixing bugs and assembly. Like people have been working on games for a real long time. Uh, so yeah, like I don't know. I don't know why that was written that way, but you know, there could be like a whole plethora of reasons. Probably a combination of all of those things, right? Um,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, fair enough. It probably is a combination, and because obviously you are going back into the 90s, it was 30 years ago, so it's easy to think, oh, if it was a
yeah.
couple of years ago, a new project. But yeah, because if they've got legacy code, and as a result, they're having to still use some of the old standards. But yeah, I've heard those arguments before from a lot of people. You got to use C only. But I've seen people that were hardcore C++ developers, and then I don't talk to them for a year or two, or 6 months, and then I talk to them, and to them C++ is now the devil, and they're just all about C code. But then literally, it's just what you were saying, Parker. They're kind of hypocritical because they'll use a C++ compiler and other tools that C++ has,
Right.
and other modern languages have brought about, that provide a
Yeah.
lot of great functionality to the
Oh
developer.
yeah. Yeah.
Because I never come across anyone that writes C code in a C compiler in a C style, in an IDE that they, or a text editor more specifically, that they would have used in the 90s, and used terminal command prompt to compile it and leave it at that. I don't know anyone that's a serious developer outside of some crazy person. Like they all still use the latest tools. They still use VS Code, or they use the C++ compiler, or this debugger, for example, but then they'll swear by C code. And it's like, C++ can still be used great. You don't have to use all the features, or use certain one in a certain way. But yeah, I think people take it a bit too far, and it gets, as with coding, it can become a bit too religious. You got to have this coding
Mhm.
standard, you got to do this coding language, or game development is better than web development, or web development is better than game development. And it's, at the end of the day, as long as you're taking action, I don't think it really matters that much, unless you need it super specific, and you need to
Yeah.
go super super low level, for example. But most people don't.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like it's more like I think these kind of conversations that people have about these programming languages, I think it's fun. I think
Can be,
people kind of
yes.
I think people kind of get into it because it's like just as an engineer, you kind of this is your life, and you kind of love just getting into the nitty gritty details, and almost like sense of like over a beer you just one up each other about the little details that about all these compilers and languages, and it's a good bit of fun, right? Like it's not a I mean absolutely impacts development processes. I don't want to downplay the different languages and how it impacts the development processes and people's lives when they're making these programs. um, but yeah, like I mean, to a certain degree, when push comes to shove, you just do whatever you got to do to get the product out the door.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's yeah, it's to me, it's more like I'm aware of it. I'm aware of all the differences of like between like the different languages that I'm jumping into and using. And if there's new things I got to learn about the language, I'll figure it out. But I don't try to like make a judgment call just based on the language itself of like what it's that it's good or bad, or I should do it this way or that way. Just more personal preferences a lot of the times.
Yeah, and obviously, the team you're working in as well. Because if you're working in a company and they're using C++,
Hmm.
then you obviously, you have to go with that. Or if they're using
Yeah.
like a really old version of C++, you have to go with that, even if you might,
Right. Yeah.
know newer versions of C++. Because I know people that work on really old systems. Like, I've got a friend that works
Hmm.
like in the gaming, gambling sector, where they have the like those slot machines, but like the electronic
Right.
gamified ones. And he
Right.
was saying they're so low powered, Most of them because they're old computers. Obviously, a newer one would have a decent spec system in there, but they're so low powered and they're having to code. I can't remember the exact specifics, but like the spec that he told me, like the amount of RAM or the how little RAM it had, and the type of processor, like so many times they're having to code in on a single core style environment, whilst it's still doing all the other things that it's doing and making sure it's running, and they're having to make these games work as well. And it's like, yeah, obviously you can't go in there expecting you're going to use C++17, for example. It's just not going to
Mhm.
happen. So
Right.
yeah, you have it's relevant to obviously the environment you're in and what you're trying to do as well.
Yeah. Yeah. There is something to be said about though. Like actually for the project I'm working on is like I'm using C sharp for a lot of the UI programming. I guess like the backend too. Just kind of just turning out that way. Although in retrospect, I really shouldn't have done that. I feel like I should have used C++, but um, there is something to be said about how you know if you get to the level of like a language has garbage collection versus it doesn't, like C versus C++, like you know whatever. If you're going to be using C++ compiler, there's not much of a difference. But like if you go to the level of like C sharp versus C++, or like if you're like gonna go like functional programming versus like imperative programming that just employ like kind of includes a lot of those other functionalities into the language. Like I think there's some real conversation to be had there, and some real differences that you have to be aware of before starting a project, because these things can cause a lot of like really big issues in the development process. So I think there's some real conversations you can have, but just not between like C and C++, right?
Yeah, yeah, they're a lot closer. Yeah, you're right. Like if you're going beyond the C++ level, C sharp, Java, and obviously even higher with stuff like Python, then it is a more serious conversation because
Yeah,
you using C++ versus using Python, you're going to be using them for two probably separate tasks, and
yeah,
you'll probably have a more clear cut answer. Okay, C++ is the better one to go, or Python is the better one to go. Whereas C++, yeah, it does become more religious at that point, unless you're supporting legacy systems, and at that point,
right.
none of the arguments can because it's a legacy system, and unless the company or the clients willing to rebuild it, which most of the time they're not. And for anyone that's listening, that's a great opportunity to make money in terms of getting roles or contracts because they pay a lot of money. If you know a technology, a framework, or a language that's not as well known now, companies will pay a lot just because they need to support their old systems.
Mm-hmm. Right,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, and that's actually one of the reasons why I ended up picking C sharp for a lot of this, is
Mm.
because I was worried about the cost of hiring someone to work in
Yes.
like environment like this. And C plus plus, if I was just working on this by myself, I would absolutely just write in C plus plus Qt or whatever.
Yeah.
But I was obviously being a startup, the question of cost of hiring and training someone to work in these kind of projects, I was hoping that it would be much cheaper, and in a way, it did turn out that way. Not as big of an impact that I thought it would, but I think there's something to say about like it'll be much harder to find someone that's really really good at like able to write good C++ code, versus like just finding some WPF like C sharp kind of UI kind of programming uh, roles, or um, yeah, like I think there's like some really real business implications there that you should be aware of, when you're kind of picking these languages for
Oh
your
yeah,
project.
for sure. Especially when you are building a team. So, most important question of the podcast: where is Halo Infinite co-op campaign? I'm still waiting.
Oh,
I want the co-op campaign. I mean, you work there. Like, what's going on?
I can't say much about that, right? I don't know much.
Yeah. Are they even still
Um,
doing it? Because I remember when they announced that it wasn't coming, and then they said, initially, and they said the local couch one isn't coming yet. And then I got to a point where I just said to myself, I'll be happy with just the online one, like me and then somebody else in their house. And then we didn't even have that as well. And I was like, I just want to, because I've already played the game once and I loved it. It's actually my favorite Halo. Halo 3 and Reach were my favorite ones, but Halo Infinite has just slightly surpassed it, for me. So like it was so good the game was. I really want to play because a cousin of mine, I played all the Halos on my own, but I've also played them with him. Halo, Gears, and a couple of other franchises like Army of Two have been like our co-op games, and Halo Infinite so far is the one that we just can't play yet.
I don't know. I think I absolutely like I wasn't I didn't really I wouldn't say I grew up with Halo, but I did play Halo like 3 with some friends, this just trying out like couch co-op and all that, and that was a blast, absolute really fun, right? So I mean, I not just like a territory of like if I start like saying anything real about Halo Infinite, really just be conjectures because all I know about Halo Infinite's co-op capabilities that my little corner of the AI character systems was architected so that it will support something like that. It wouldn't be too hard to kind of make that happen, but the game is massive, right? Like hundreds of people working on it. So I can't say I know much about why it's not out yet and what the difficulties are. But yeah, I don't know. It's really fun. I agree, but I can't give you an answer why it's not out yet.
Fair enough, fair enough. So, how did you get your job at 343? What was the,
Man,
interview process like?
I don't know. I don't know how I got that job, but so I was in college and I was looking for a job, or I was looking for an internship because it was my after my junior year, and I went to a career fair and there was a Microsoft booth there, and I said I wanted to work on games. I just kind of went around to different booths, and my focus in college was graphics and operating system type of stuff because my college didn't really have like a game related thing. But I still went around, hey, I'm like working on personal projects that's like all game related. I want to do game development, and the Microsoft folks who kind of just took my information and didn't really say much. It's like, oh, okay, like you want to do games, and we have some game stuff, like hey, and it's more like the M channels are telling you, like, hey, like this is what we do, right? And so that's when I also learned a lot about what they're doing with Xbox and whatever. And like a couple weeks later, I just got an email saying like, hey, like we're doing this like on-site interview for like game development related internships at Microsoft. I was like, holy, this is like some jackpot. I thought I got just real lucky, and I showed up, and I think I did really well at the interview. There were like phases, I guess, that were kind of people were going through. Like there was these like multiple rooms, and they're different, asking like different kinds of questions. I kind of just blew through them because it was like my bread and butter. And then they're like, okay, like you did really well
What
there.
sort of questions were they asking before we move on?
Oh, so one of them was like, I don't know if it was like a demo project or something. They just had like a simple game up, and they're like, hey, can you like add this feature here and add that feature here? And was like, can you make the camera interpolate nicely? Can you like make the movement smoother? And it's like really simple stuff. You just
So it was actual coding, that they was asking actually, asking you to do on a computer. Then it wasn't just
yeah,
theoretical.
yeah. So for that one, it was like just like a you just code on the spot, or you just type into the thing and then just build a feature. And but it's like all simple stuff, like it's stuff that you can do in like like a minute or two. Just like a really simple lerping and I mean, I guess maybe perhaps it feels like, I mean, for me, like I've been already kind of been in that space for like years at that point, so it was like fairly straightforward.
Yeah.
And the other questions were things like, here's like a simple game based on this grid system that every entity in the game has to like live on, and like I want to create like a pathfinding algorithm. So can you like mock it up? And I just kind of wrote it on the whiteboard. Can you? And it was also like I want to find like I think it was like closest like three actors or something like that. I forget the exact questions, but it was more like just technical questions, but writing on the whiteboard type of deal. And then another one was like I think I don't know if that was something that everybody else was doing, but I got pulled into a room and we talked about like architecture type stuff of like C++ and like low level type of stuff, and that was just like kind of uh, vaguely talking about like these languages, and kind of like what we did like for the first like, 10, 15 minutes of this interview. Um, yeah, so it was all technical questions, like because especially because I wasn't coming in for like a design role or like an artist role. Like I was like coming in for like an engineering role. So all the questions were very technical, and that's all they really kind of were looking
Yeah, I mean, makes sense that they would have a bunch of technical questions during it because it's a very technical role and a very demanding role, and they're working on titles that are beloved for Xbox fans and obviously now PC gamers
at.
as well. So they want to make sure they're getting people that can get the job done. So
Mhm.
before 343, you worked at SpaceX. What did you do
Mhm.
there, and how did you get your job? Like, 'cause, 343, SpaceX, Titans, but Titans in totally different industries. It's not like you went
Yeah,
from one gaming company to 343. You went from SpaceX again. Like what made again on top of the what I've just asked you? What made you leave SpaceX to go to 343?
right. I mean, it's actually um, like a very funny story. So, like at SpaceX, I ended up there mostly out of luck as well. I had this strategy of finding summer internships by just cold calling like crazy, just sending like a million emails out there looking for opportunities, right? And one of the guys that kind of got back to me were people that are working in supply chain and management at SpaceX. And I was like, okay, like this isn't exactly what I was looking for. I was looking for some sort of like programming type of deal, but they were looking for like a technical person to kind of come in and help them with manage their supply chain. So the internship turned out to be a lot of like using SQL and Tableau to kind of compile their data into a little bit more manageable, um, like a little bit easier to understand than like a spreadsheet, right? Or like a just database of like entries. Um, so that work, but I still really enjoyed it. I learned a lot about like I did at that point. I was like, what, in 19 or whatever, didn't understand anything, and they kind of taught me a lot about like how companies work and just like what are they doing with like why does supply chain matter to a company like SpaceX. And I learned a lot, but and I tried my best. I worked really hard when I was there, but that wasn't the same much because everybody there is like working like crazy. I was like easily working like 12, 13 hours a day, and they give you food and everything. So I just stayed there the whole time. And that's pretty much all I did that summer.
Yeah.
And at the end of it, they really liked me. So they were like, "Hey, like, would you want to stay for SpaceX?" And I was like, "Yeah, I want to stay, but I want a more like technical role. I'm looking for a more like C++ engineering kind of like a role." So they kind of put me in contact with one of the leads there that's working on the actual rockets and stuff. And I was like, "Oh, wow, this is like really cool." And I ended up talking to this guy, and he absolutely schooled me. Like, he was like, "No, no, no, you know nothing." Like, and he was very direct too. Like, he was telling me like exactly what I like didn't understand. And I was like, "Oh my god!" Like, that's kind of it was like a wake up call. Like, "Oh my god!" Like, I have a lot to learn here. If I actually want to work in the real industry with C++ and kind of these low level languages and do all that kind of
Was it like just raw C plus plus you didn't know? Was it coding paradigms? Was it to do with aerospace and have that you can implement that in C plus plus? What was it specifically that
Mhm.
he made you realize that you just didn't know? Was it just you was inexperienced in C plus plus?
Mostly C++. Like aerospace, it wouldn't even get there. Like he was asking me questions about like what is like data, like well he didn't say data encapsulation. Like what is a class and like what does like data encapsulation mean in like C++? And I was kind of just frozen in the spot because I never really thought about that. I was just
Yeah.
C++ was just something I can write programs with. Like
Especially when you're
I
that
was like
young, you
very
probably
very
don't think about it that much.
yeah, yeah, and I also did understand that it was like a lot of like teams have to work on these code bases together, and it was really complicated to manage all that. So you have to like code in a specific way to make sure that everything runs smoothly and you don't find random bugs and stuff. So he was just like telling me all these, asking me a lot of questions about like, you know, like constructors and so like the specific question that one time he asked me was like, why do you never want to throw an exception from a destructor in a C++ class? And I just kind of froze. Like I have no idea like why that would be like an issue. And he was telling me like, oh, not that I think that specifically is not something I run into every day either because I don't really throw exceptions from destructors ever. Anyways, but he was kind of like explaining to me like why that's like a bad thing and um, uh, what was the other one? Um, uh, Oh, the other one was actually what I brought up earlier about the difference between structs and classes. And he was like, okay, so like so you seem like you at least know what structs and classes are. Like, do you understand the difference between them? I had no idea. Like, and obviously, like now I know like the difference. There is none. They're basically the same thing, just with like permission access difference. Like, instruct everything's public, in classes everything's private by default, but you can obviously specify. So functionally, there's no difference. Um, yeah, so those are the kind of questions that he was asking me, and I was just like shocked, like, oh my god, like I know nothing. And that was like one of the moments where like a switch flipped in my head and I just went crazy. I just like worked so hard when I got back from the internship to just learn all these things that he recommended this book called Effective C++. And that's like when I started like learning about all the details of the language and like why you shouldn't do certain things and why you should do certain things and like how the compiler works. And I just kind of went crazy like after that, almost too much actually. I like definitely had like moments of burnout and whatnot too. Um, and that kind of led to me kind of doing so well in that next interview at that Microsoft Gaming interviews. So like SpaceX kind of like just turned more into like a almost like a stepping stone for me. I wasn't like I think like rockets are cool, and I think like everything that Elon Musk has been doing, especially at least back then, was like amazing. So I really thought it was like the industry was really cool, but I always still wanted to do games and whatnot and C++ and stuff. So I still steer myself away from that, but it turned into like a really good learning experience for
Okay, that's good stuff. So, before SpaceX, you worked at another aerospace organization, NASA. You know, tell
me.
us, similar questions. Tell us about what you did there, how you got your job, and why did you leave NASA for SpaceX?
So I went to Caltech, and Caltech works very closely with JPL. I don't know what the exact um, setup there is, but it was something like everybody working at like JPL was also like somehow affiliated with Caltech, and but JPL facilities were owned by like NASA or something like. Don't quote me on that. But it was like a very tightly knit. Every single time you see JPL, you see Caltech as well. So it was very natural for people working or going to Caltech to find summer internships at JPL. Um, and uh, and there was like some programs that were specifically set up for that. But the way it happened for me was I went to this talk and I had like this researcher uh, was giving a talk on um, like she was like been working in like the geological studies of the faults like that are in like which prevalent in that area. um, uh, and I kind of just walked up to her and be like, hi, like I don't know too much about all of this, but I'd love to learn. And at that point I was literally 18, right? That was like my first internship from college ever. And like I don't know anything. I was kind of honest about that too. Generally, I was like I don't really know much about this topic. But I still have some programming skills and maybe I can be of help to you and I would love to work with you. And she thought that was like a very, you know, uh, uh, what's the word? Entrepreneurial, I guess. Like just very, she thought it was very brave of me to come up to her and be honest like that. And she gave me an opportunity at her lab over the summer. So I what I did ended up doing was they had this really antiquated website for kind of taking this map and overlaying geological data over it that they captured with these um, planes that would fly over these faults and capture a bunch of data. And what I suggested was, hey, like this website is really hard to use, and you can't really do much with it. So how about we kind of turn this to a little bit more like modern, like Google Maps style app like format. So I did that for like a summer, and I just built that website for them. And actually, I think you can actually still check it out, like Geo. Oh, if I can remember the website, like Geo Gateway. I think that's the website. Yeah, geogateway.org. Oh, no,
Okay.
no, no, this, well, uh, yeah, it is. Yeah, it's still there. I mean, this is like, yeah, yeah. Andrea Donnellan, she was the one that kind of gave me the opportunity. Um, and it's totally different now. Like, this is not at all what I built. This is so much better than what I built. I guess I was just kind of like the initial idea behind like kind of making that really a little bit more modern website for you to be able to easily use it. And the website I built was kind of functionally like useful, but also looking back at it, you can do it so much better. But interestingly enough, it looks like they kept my logo, Geo Gateway. But yeah, I built that website for them. That was kind of like my first internship, and that was at JPL.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I just went on. Is it geo-gateway.org? That the one? Yes,
Yeah, that's the
yes.
one. Yeah,
I
yeah,
found
yeah,
that. Okay, that's
yeah,
pretty
yeah.
interesting.
looks like they're still using Django. That's hilarious. That's actually.
So, having worked for three titans in their respective industries, what advice would you give to others looking to work for a company like 343, SpaceX, or NASA, and especially when they want to do something engineering like coding? How do you
You know,
get a role there? How do you stand out from everyone else?
I think a big thing that helped me stand out was I was never afraid to just walk up to people and start talking. I was just going up to random people and just be like, "Hi, like, I think you're doing really cool stuff. Like, can I work with you?" You know, that kind of attitude of just like, I know I don't know anything, but like, I love to work with you, and I can learn things fast, and I kind of just going on and on about just how enthusiastic I am to just offer my services, if you will. That really helped me stand out. A lot of folks that I kind of all my friends at the time, they were going through these kind of usual paths of finding these opportunities, but I was always kind of a firm believer in just cold calling and just finding opportunities by sheer sheer will, I guess. And just don't be afraid. Just go up and start talking. Just talk about yourself and be honest. Just be honest about where you are, and it's okay if you don't know anything. Just just go around asking for opportunities. Just get your foot in the door, and once you're in, just work your butt off, right? Like just learn everything as fast as possible, and just make that your life. If that's what you want to do. Um,
Yeah.
and so that'd be like that's always kind of my go-to advice. Just don't feel afraid to just put yourself out there and just do
Yeah,
these
for sure.
things.
Because I find most people aren't willing to ask, or talk to
Mhm.
people, or either so afraid of putting themselves out there, whether it's fear of failing, or whether it's looking bad, or being judged, or whatever it is. They just don't want to put them like they want to wait till whatever they're putting out there is perfect. It's never going to be perfect, because even if you
Yeah,
get to a
yeah,
level that maybe, I mean, perfection is obviously you know different based on each person's opinion, but even if you get to some level of perfection, it'd probably be irrelevant by the time you get there. So it's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
if you're making a game, for example, and you're trying to make it the best game that you can, like the graphics, the gameplay, the story, the online, every little thing to and you, especially if you're not a big company as well, you're just starting out, you will probably make a game that's no longer relevant, that comes out and it probably should have been out 10 years ago, because people don't want to play that game anymore. So it's like if a game came out today that somebody spent over 10 years making, and originally they was making it for the Wii, and they have all these motion controls, all these gimmicks. Nowadays I know you can do it with the Switch, but people probably wouldn't want it because that phase has passed in the gaming industry. May come back, but it's not here right now. So you might release a game that might be amazing on every level except desirability. Whereas if you had released it when the Wii was out, yes, you may not have released a perfect game, but you would have released a game that was relevant and people wanted a game like that. So yeah, it's definitely be like I have similar advice as well for people. Be willing to just pick up the phone and make that call. That might be a physical phone call. That might be an email. That might be a text message. It might be going and asking someone. Knock on that door. Because what's the worst that can happen? In reality, you ask a company you want to work for them, or someone you want to try and get a job. They're not going to pull a gun on you. They're going to be like, no. Worst
No.
case. Yeah, like when you think about it, it's just those two letters, no. And I find that a lot of people, if you get the no, if you ask them why is it no, a big chunk of them will give you some advice. And if you're willing to put your ego aside, you can get some solid advice from that. So you can benefit even with the no. And you got to be willing to ask the question. And then if it's a no, either persevere or get information of why it's a no. It's like, when learned at SpaceX what you didn't know and how inexperienced you was in C++, you could have either taken that to heart and be like, either he doesn't know what he's talking about and I'm amazing, or I'm terrible at coding and I can never do coding. Because I've seen people do that as well. Instead, you was like, okay, these are things I don't know. Let me figure them out. Let me read this book, etc., etc. And you've built on top of that over the last few years. You gotta have the right mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like spot on. And I think you know, like all of those no's do feel like failures. Like it
Yes,
kind of hurts, when you do like
in the
face
moment, definitely.
in the moment. Yeah, but you just gotta pick yourself and keep going. I even even every day right now I hear no. Like I mean, I just had GDC where I was like trying to talk to people about maybe using my software, and I heard no a lot, right? And every single time it's like a gut punch, but you just pick yourself up and just keep going, and just grind things out. Like I don't think anything good comes out of something that you didn't grind for. Like my manager at 343, he taught me so many things, and one of the things that he really wanted to emphasize and talk to me about was like how important it is for that last little bit of game development. He says something along the lines of like last 20% takes like 80% of the time.
Yeah.
Um, and and like that kind of that last little bit is like where products kind of come together, and that's when like you start to see that that gem that you've been digging for so long. But that's like the really core of that experience, like of game development. But I think it kind of like applies to like everything, just like in terms of like life experiences of like going out to people and like failing, and like there's gonna be hardships and things are like problems are gonna get really tricky to solve and all that, but just keep going and keep going and keep going, and at the end of it you're gonna get like a really nice product. Have that be you as a person, or like it could be a game, or it could be like your company or whatever, but you grind it out, you're gonna get results, so just keep on going.
Oh yeah, for
Yeah.
sure. So, talking about your company, after working for 343, you founded your own startup, Abstract. Tell us about Abstract. What does it do and your role there?
Right. So the gist of it is we're trying to optimize the workflow between programmers and non-programmers. Um, but the cool part is that we're using a scripting language to do that. What we're doing is nowadays visual coding, visual scripting, or also calling no code, is like a very popular option for non-programmers to kind of prototype things really quickly and build logic without having to know the syntax of a language and all that, because nowadays, like especially working in games, like everybody kind of has to code to a certain degree, right?
Yes.
But what happens is, you take these kind of really kind of non-technical folks building technical things, and then it comes time to ship, you have to polish these things up. You're going to have performance issues, you're going to have crashes and bugs, and oftentimes what happens, you kind of hand it over to an engineer and be like, hey, can you fix this up for me? And from an engineer's perspective, this kind of like visual scripting is so hard to work with, because we're used to seeing really compact information in text form, right? So what we've done is we created a scripting language so you can do it, write it in visual format or text-based format, and kind of seamlessly translate between the two. So the idea is, anybody can go into this language and prototype whatever they want, and it's okay if it's not the best product ever. Just put your idea down on paper, and you can have an engineer come in and take a look at it in like a text format and fix it up really quickly, and put in comments explaining what's going on and like why it has to be done this way, and then submit it to your source code or source control, Git or whatever, Perforce or whatever, and then your designers won't lose their visibility because they can translate it back into the node. So it's and we're really trying to just hit all the checkboxes for what a scripting language should provide for an environment like a game development environment. So it runs at C++ speeds, supports visual scripting, it supports text-based scripting, does all the communication work for you. It works with source control really well because now you're storing things in a text-based format, almost like code, so you can actually just look at it on Git and see exactly what the changes are. So yeah, it's just a scripting language that will just really smooth out your workflow from prototype all the way to ship. That's kind of the basic idea.
Okay. So, what interested you and compelled you to start a middleware company? Because most founders that I talk to, they start some sort of, total back-end company or a customer-facing company, let's say where they're making the game itself. So, yours is in the middle ground. So, like, what compelled you to do that?
Well, initially I wanted to make a game, because I really making video games is kind of the second love of my life. No, the real love of my life, which is my wife. But the second love of my life is just I just want to make some good games. But I was looking at the tools out there, and Unreal seems like a really good option, for me, because especially C++ performance and that kind of deal is really important for me. But all these development tools and scripting language just wasn't the kind of tool that I wanted to use. I didn't want to use Lua. It doesn't perform. Um, I didn't want to use blueprints because again, it doesn't perform, but also I can't really work with visual scripting at scale. It doesn't work for me. And I think a lot of engineers kind of feel that way just because the information is kind of sprawls so out so fast. So I kind of said,
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm not the biggest fan of visual scripting if I can get away with it. I mean, it's nice on a high level on some form on a little few specifics because sometimes when I've done some iOS stuff, let's say in Swift or Objective C, doesn't really matter which one, and I'm using Xcode and I click on a variable or a component or something, and then on the right a bit of information pops up about it and I can change the parameters without coding it. I mean, I do like being able to do that and then see with a live preview, seeing it on the fly how things change. But
mm,
I don't want to code my whole interface or, God forbid, trying to make, a whole game's logic, like, the gameplay, the AI or the NPC paths, with visual scripting. People do it, but like, yeah, I know because I see some of those visual scripting, graphs and maps they have on that I've seen online. Some of the complex ones, and it's just like the amount of obviously even coding is complexity, but there's just so many nodes, and if you zoom out, it's just like where do you begin?
mhm. Yeah, exactly. It becomes really hard to kind of debug these things. Like, oh my god.
Yeah,
Yeah. So that's kind of the exact place I was. I was like, oh my god, I can't do this. Like, I don't want to deal with this, but everybody's like using blueprints. So the goal there was like I just want to basically like take this concept of no code and just make a version that will work in a scalable environment, right? So that kind of that drive to just fix that problem was kind of what made me jump into this. As a was it a good business decision? I don't know. I'm learning a lot of these things on the fly in terms of running a company and stuff, and there are certainly difficulties that come with trying to run a company off of a scripting language. And the biggest issue is it takes a long time for these things to mature, right? And I just got the like after a year and like 10-ish months of full-time development, I finally got the beta out, and it's still not quite there for a production environment, I would say, just yet. And we're targeting that, towards the end of the probably towards the end of the year. But it's a really difficult thing to do, perhaps much more difficult than I initially thought. But I still really felt like um, making a game with just no code like that is just a death trap. Like that will bite me in the butt real hard later down the line, and put me into like a development hell I did not want to be in. So that's kind of like the motivation behind Abstract. It's a tool that just wasn't like an idea that was in the industry already, that wasn't working for me. And I thought I could do it better. So here I am, just doing it better, right?
Right, I mean, that's always a good opportunity, a good excuse to do it, and especially when you're trying to make the game yourself. Like, having worked on gaming projects personally myself, there's been times where I'm just like, how is this not already in the framework or the engine that I'm using? And I see people just redoing the same thing again and again, and I've created some sort of library that a lot of times put it on GitHub for free, and people love it as well because they want to use the exact same thing, and it's a great way of honing your skills. So, what does abstract look like specifically? Because you're saying it's not available right yet, for the public to access. But what does it look like in terms of, I go on my computer. Like, how am I using it? How am I accessing it? Where, at what stage am I using it? How does it work?
The beta is available right now. You can go
Oh,
check
is
it
it?
out right now.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah. If you go to abstractsoft.net, hey, promotion, eh? um,
Abstractsoft.net.
yeah, abstractsoft.net, and you'll be able to see. There's a bunch of videos as well. If and you can just sign up and download the beta and just try it out. It's just like any other scripting language. It comes with a compiler, and there's an IDE around it. And the IDE, once you open it up, you'll see the node graph editor, and the text-based editor, and there's a button for just switching between the two. And yeah, it's just as advertised. It's all in there.
Okay, that's cool. So, with Abstract, the company, did you raise funding or have you just bootstrapped that so far? And is there anyone else with you that's doing it?
So it's all bootstrapped so far, and I got my business partner Nick. He's actually the UX and the kind of the almost like user, like the non-programmer user side of things. And he's actually he used to work with me at 343, and now we're doing this together. And he used to be the animator there. So he's kind of providing a lot of those UX input and also using the thing and giving me feedback and internally. And we're also developing a title with it, which is kind of the goal. Initially, right, like making a game. So that's what we're doing right now. We're actually making the game with it right now.
Okay, that's cool. So, do you have any partnerships with companies to actually use Abstract? Because, it'd be cool if somebody else used it other than yourself in any major way.
Right. So we're actually talking with a lot of schools. So at least at the time of recording this, last week was GDC. So that's kind of what I was doing all week last week was talking. Beta came out probably like 10 days ago or something like that. Then we got to GDC. I was like, hey, like we're handing it out and with QR codes and whatever, and asking people to try it out, and people were quite excited about it. So we're actually starting to partner with schools and whatnot. We don't Nothing's nailed down yet, so I won't say any names of which schools and
Hmm.
stuff. But yeah, we're partnering with schools first, especially because it's still in beta.
Yeah.
But um, and we're gonna be slowly kind of trickling it back up to like double A studios and hopefully in the future like triple A studios. I'm gonna try to partner with them as well. But talks are going on. Maybe I'll keep you updated on that. But yeah, we're looking for partnerships right
Okay, that sounds cool. So, what's the process like for creating a language? Because you know, when you're at university or you're at a job or doing some sort of coding, you work out. You make a project, you make a website, you make a game. You might do some back end, but like, what's the process of creating a tool that you would actually use to make one of these products? So, like a language in your case.
Oh, geez, it was a big project. This is like the most amount of coding I've done in a short amount of time ever. But I mean, it's not too different from any other problem solving. You come up with a focus. In this case, it was, I think the biggest thing was kind of coming up with these pillars to kind of design around. So the pillars here were, that no code, encode, and the translation in between. Get that technology nailed down. And then the other requirements where it has to run at C++ speeds. So get the architecture down around that, and it has to support like hot reloading because for fast iteration. So get the architecture down around that, and it has to work with any game engine. And so again, get the architecture down around that. Right? Once you get those pillars down, it's just breaking down into parts and solving the problems one by one. Um, the translation technology was the hardest part, I would say. That was just, I mean, it's all like patent pending now, so I can probably talk about it. But it was a lot of experimentation with different ways of setting up the node graph and the script, and because it has to be like a one-to-one correspondence between the two. So solving that problem kind of boiled down to a lot of like I had to learn how to write script parser. So you have to parse the script and then turn it into like an abstract syntax tree, and then turn the abstract syntax tree into the node graph. And then from the node graph side of things, you have to basically go out the opposite way of you go from abstract syntax tree and then go down to the code by using code generation logic, right? So that was kind of like how that logic was set up. Um, and then from there, now that the language is set up, I have to write the compiler, which is just in most programming languages, you kind of go one way there, where you take the text of the language itself and then turn it into abstract syntax tree, and then take that into compile it down to something that you can run through a VM or whatnot, or maybe just straight up machine language. Um, I won't go into the details of how all that works, because it is kind of important to us.
Yeah.
But we wrote the compiler to kind of support everything that we're talking about of like C++ speeds, hot reloading, and then the final piece of the puzzle was writing an SDK of so that you can integrate this into any C++ based program, right? So those are the kind of components that went into this. And once that's all done, well, the most amount of polish that went into the whole thing before putting out the beta was the UI, because when you write an IDE, there's a lot of little things that you have to get right, like what does all the hotkeys do? Like how do you actually open files, and how do you like what does all the buttons do, and like how are you telling the user using the interface like how to use certain things. So kind of nailing all that UX down, which is like where Nick came like in real clutch. He really helped out with so much of that. Yeah, that was like the general process of it. I mean, short answer is it's a lot of work and you just got to do it. Long answer is you just lay out the problem. What are you trying to solve? Like what needs to be done to solve those? What needs to be done to kind of get this product out there and tackle it one by one, and don't stop until you're done. So that's
Oh
the
yeah, for sure. That's definitely a good advice for doing anything. So, what's your biggest regret in your development journey so far?
Oh, using C sharp. That was the biggest. So yeah, I mean, like C sharp. Don't hate me, Microsoft, but your language is. I don't.
What
I'm
don't you
not a
like about C
garbage.
sharp?
I don't like garbage collection. Let's just. I don't like it because garbage collection gives you this promise of no memory leaks, right?
Yes.
But that's a lie, right? Like, what you end up with is these. It's very easy to create references from a global entity, like a not global, but something that stays alive throughout like a very long time during your application. That has like invisible references to objects that should be destroyed. So, for example, you open a tab, you do a bunch of stuff, and it consumes memory. And then when you close the tab, you expect the memory to just disappear, right? It needs to be garbage collected. But what you end up with is you have like events or like lambdas, and they have invisible, like kind of automatic variable captures. And what that means is like because the function that you wrote requires variables and whatnot from like outside of the scope of the function, it will capture the variable and hold on to it. And if these things happen at a global scope, for example, the main editor, has a reference to something in the tab, then that tab's memory will, stay with you forever.
Mm,
And so you end up with memory leaks even though you have garbage collection. And the worst part about that is you're not keeping track of it when you're programming because the language doesn't require you to, right? C++, you essentially required to just keep track of every bit of memory that you're using. And it's a lot of work, but what you find with C sharp is that you have to do that work anyways in the end.
yes.
Because you have to track down all of these invisible references, and when you close a tab, you have to keep track of the memory, make sure it goes down. If it doesn't go down, you have to use a profile to like track down what that stupid invisible link is, and it's just a constant whack-a-mole that you're going to be playing. So I think from this experience, if I've learned anything, is I stay away from garbage collection. That's
Yeah.
that's kind of like
Yeah, I think stuff like that works really well when you're doing stuff at a small scale, almost at almost at an academic level. When you're teaching, and because you're not doing something so complex that you run into the issue that you're talking about. But when you start doing more complex things, you do start to realize that, like, is it really that worth it compared to what you can do in an alternative? It's like visual scripting. It's fine if you're doing something really basic. If you're doing some really basic tech demo or just showing off a couple of features, or, teaching it, there's nothing wrong with it. But if you're trying to make some AAA title and that's got probably millions of code, for like 100 or 200 developers, you really start to see the problems with using tools like that, approaches like that. It's just the promises that these tools make aren't as you know you know they don't stand up when you're at that higher level. Like, things just
yeah,
change and you just start to
yeah,
realize, oh, it probably would have just been better if I just used C++, or it would have been better if I just did the garbage collection myself, because I'm having to do this and that as an alternative. Because even if he
yeah.
solves the issue, you end up doing other stuff or spending time on other stuff, and then you're like, like, how important really, how useful was that particular
Yeah.
tool, that
Yeah,
feature.
exactly. Yeah, and that actually, funnily enough, kind of tied back into like me developing abstract as well, because scripting languages traditionally, they a lot of them run off of VMs and whatnot. They have their like own memory management, their own threading system, and all that. And I really wanted to stay away from that because of the exact issues that we're talking about. Like now, it's an invisible problem, like invisible thing that. Sorry, can you hear that in the background?
Yeah, it's fine. You can carry on.
Okay,
It's not too bad.
sorry about that. There's a lawnmower going past my window. It's a little like, yeah, like so, all of these VMs kind of bring these invisible features to you, that you don't really know about. So I like that's one of the kind of that core pillar actually kind of came on like in the middle of the process when I learned about like all these problems with garbage collection and whatnot. It's like if you start introducing all of these like invisible features, it will eventually come back and bite you in the butt because now you have to debug this thing that you don't actually understand. You've just been using it blindly, right? So the architecture of abstract kind of became extremely lightweight. It's all like compiled down, to machine language, and what you see is like kind of what you get, kind of like a programming language, right? So yeah, like it's like so spot on. Like all these kind of promises of like, oh, you just don't have to worry about it. Never true. It's just never true. You will always like eventually run into an issue um, that you just like kind of have to deal with. With a lot of these kind of magical tools that are kind of available out there.
Yeah, it's good that you mentioned, what you see is what you get kind of tool leaders, drag and drop. And the thing is, they can be useful for people that aren't technical, especially if they're trying to do something that's, a little bit extra. It's not part of their main job. They need to do like whip something up. It can be really
Mm-hmm.
useful for them. So the thing is, these tools have a place in the world,
Mm-hmm.
in the industry,
Absolutely.
but because they get a bit of success with them, they're like, you know what? We can expand it out to every developer and say, you don't need to code anymore. And you can just, drag your components on. You can just link them using visual scripting. So
Mm-hmm.
they're replacing stuff that for people that it doesn't need to be replaced for, because they just
Yeah.
give them subpar experiences. Because when you look, and
Mm-hmm.
something like Unreal, yes, they have blueprints, but there's a reason why they support C++ still.
Right.
Coding
Exactly.
in a proper language, because they
Exactly.
know that anyone that's a serious developer that really knows how to code will probably at some level use C++, or some sort of proper language. In this case happens to be C++. It could be C, it could potentially be Java, it could be something else possibly, but that they will use the coding aspect. They may use visual scripting to quickly whip stuff up, to set things up, etc., etc. You That's fair enough. But you'll get to a point where it's just going to be so much easier. Because it's like, I'll do work in Photoshop, for example, and I'll just think, if I could just code this in something like C++, I could position the item, the layers on my Photoshop file so much easier than by dragging them and use it. Obviously, I'm not a Photoshop expert, so I know there are tools to help with positioning and whatnot. But I've seen experts do it, and I'm just looking at it thinking I could do it faster in code. Again, that doesn't mean the whole thing should be in code because it doesn't suit it. But
Right.
to if they had a coding feature, I know they have some scripting, but let's say if they had a coding feature where you could do some in C++, it's like Adobe saying every designer should now be coders. It just doesn't make sense. But it does
Right.
make sense that you could leverage code to enhance, the design experience, and vice versa. You could leverage these WYSIWYG tools and these high level tools to make your life easier. But
Right.
the reality is, you're not going to avoid coding in any major way if you're doing trying to do something really, really good and have the flexibility of different frameworks, different APIs, hooking up into different platforms. It's just not going to work.
Well, like, the key is options, right? Like you in a production environment, the key is that you need options. Like
Yes.
it's fantastic to have a visual scripting language. You don't have to worry about syntax. You can just drag and drop. It's a very intuitive tool to use. But the problems that you always see with these kind of tools is that because they're so focused on delivering that one thing, they forget that in a production environment you have to support a very wide range of options. And I think that's kind of like you know the issue, like the major issue that I see with like all of these other scripting solutions out there is like you kind of get locked into a system that you can't break out of. Like for example, like you use Lua, you have to work with the Lua VM, right? Like if you're not using the Lua VM, you're not using Lua.
Yeah.
Blueprints is the exact same thing. Like if you're using blueprints, you're using blueprints. You're not, if you start using C++, you're no longer using blueprints. So like it's a system like that out there where it's like it's really providing all of those options. There really doesn't seem to exist, but it's so critical in like a production environment. Um, and
Yeah, it becomes very difficult when you like saying you need those options. It's I remember working in a game engine called Cocos 2DX, and I still do work with it, and trying to implement an ad framework because it was effectively using C++, though there was no proper link. Because the framework supported a C++ implementation, I was able to get it to work. Whereas when they released their more visual, editor that didn't initially have any sort of scripting or coding, you could only use the sort of the hookings that they had actually created and tested. I couldn't just say, you know what, I'll use C++, I'll figure it out, and I'll get some version working. May not be as good, but it will work. You just couldn't do that. You could only use what you could drag and drop, and that was a huge disadvantage. And you end up seeing those frameworks, they add scripting, they add coding, because they realize you cannot do anything truly serious without that underlying access to
mhm.
it.
Right, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I think like one easy solution that people have for this is just make it open source, right? Like you can
Yes,
take this and use it everywhere, but just like here, just take the source code as well. Just I think that
that's
seems like
obviously a
the
solution as
option,
well.
but then like you're not really solving the problem, right? You're just like kind of solving the problem, but then giving you another problem to deal with. It's, I could go on about this all day. So.
No, that's fair enough. So yeah, we're gonna wrap up this podcast, everyone, right now because this is gonna be a shorter one than usual, and we're gonna split this into two parts. The second part will be out in probably 2 to 3 months after this particular episode airs. Before we wrap up, I'm gonna ask one more question to Parker. What's your favorite video game? Because you sound like you're a hardcore gamer.
Ooh,
What's your
oh,
favorite?
I love it. I don't have a favorite. I have a
Come
couple
on,
that
you must
always.
do. Okay, like
No, no,
name
no.
a
Let's
few.
go ahead.
Name a few. You must have a
Yeah,
few
yeah, no,
that.
no. Well, yeah. So, there are a couple that I always go back to. One is Civ. I'm an engineer at heart. I love, those kind of turn-based, you just like optimize everything, min-max everything kind of games. So it's Civ, and like XCOM, love those.
Okay.
And but then the other spectrum of that I really love is Sekiro, from Soft Games. So I have these two pools of like favorite games that I always go back to. Always a little bit hard when someone asks me what's your favorite game, but yeah, that's my answer. It's like two almost feels like opposite, but yeah, those extremes are my favorite.
Okay. And before we wrap up, what video game are you looking forward to? There must be some one
Oh,
game.
yeah, I mean, so Elden Ring DLC coming out soon. I
Yes.
can't wait. I don't know if I have the time to play it. I'm kind of like it's dying inside that I'm like so busy nowadays. But that's one. Civ 7 is coming out hopefully soon. They announced that they're working on it. So those two I'm like really, really, really excited about. But really anything that Firaxis and FromSoft does, like I just all in with those. Super excited.
Fair enough. So yeah, I just want to thank you, Parker, for coming onto the podcast today. It was great having you on, talking about your time at 343, SpaceX, NASA. In part two, we'll continue the discussion about abstract. Why you would use it over some of the alternatives. Your education, and there's some AI based questions I want to ask you as well because you're low level into coding. That I think you'll be a great person to ask these questions too. So stay tuned, everyone. So yeah, again, Parker, thank you for coming onto the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me. I was a little nervous, but I had a blast. This was really fun. Thank you for
Fantastic.
really giving
I'm glad that you enjoyed it. Thank you, everyone, and stay tuned for the next FireDEV episode. Bye bye.